Good evening and welcome to a late edition. Texas Senator Ted Cruz handed a shock defeat to controversial presidential contender Donald Trump in the Iowa Republican caucus. While in the Democratic camp, both Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders claimed victories as the race for the White House began today, with Hillary marginally ahead. With almost all the votes counted, Ted Cruz bagged 28% of the total votes against Donald Trump's 24%. Marco Rubio was third with 23%. Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders ended up in a virtual tie, with both of them splitting almost 50% of the votes each. Clinton, who is aiming to become the first woman president of the United States of America, got 49.8% of votes, and Sanders managed 49.5% of the total votes polled. Over the coming months, the other 49 states as well as U.S. territories will vote for the party nominees. A nominee will become apparent towards the middle of this year, and in November, the U.S. will pick the next president, who will assume office in January 2017. So the exciting and long-drawn contest for the White House has just about begun procedurally with full force, and we will discuss that tonight. To discuss the processes involved in the race for the White House, the importance of the Iowa caucus, what it means for the prospects of those in the fray for the next presidency in the United States, and the issues dominating the race for the White House in 2016, we are joined by Prabhat P. Shukla, former ambassador, KP Nair, consulting editor, The Telegraph, and KV Prasad, associate editor, The Tribune. I welcome you all to Late Edition. I'll begin with you, Mr. Shukla. It is said, and it's also widely accepted, that the US presidential election has very complex processes. And that's perhaps because the founding fathers of the US Constitution felt that whoever holds the White House should have the widest representation. For starters and for the uninitiated, tell us, what are these caucuses and primaries, and why do they make for stage one of the US election process?
Right. Actually, you know, the whole system that we are now witnessing is not laid out in the Constitution. It's an evolution of the selection process within the political parties, and they've been learning from each other's experience over the past 2 centuries or so. What we have today is a system of caucuses and primaries. There's a difference between the two. In a caucus, for one thing, the voting or the commitments are open. They're not by secret ballot as they are in a primary. And in a caucus, what happens is that the candidates are allowed on the Democratic side. In the in the Republican process, it's a little different. On the Democratic side, they are allowed to approach the people who have come to cast their ballot, cast their vote or their preference. And you can actually shift. You can go in as a person intending to vote for candidate A, and then you hear the different people.
So you can change your mind instantly.
And you can change your mind and do so publicly. So you just go from one group to another group. Groups can lobby within one another. And the last point on the Democratic side is that the candidates have to get a minimum of 15% of the people who have turned up to vote.
Okay.
If they get less than 15%, they are reduced to zero.
Okay.
They're not out of the race.
But virtually.
Virtually. But for that caucus, they're then out of the race. And those people, say 10%, 5%, whatever, can then again choose where they want to go.
Absolutely. So you've
That's a
explained
caucus.
the difference.
The other is a primary, where
Yes.
you actually cast a proper electoral ballot. It's a secret vote. And this then takes place either a caucus or a ballot or a primary, mostly primaries. There are about 10 states that do a caucus, about 10 or thereabouts. The rest of them still have the old style, or
40 of them.
They have primaries. And then with each of these caucuses or primaries, you get a certain number of delegates. In the old days, it used to be winner takes all. Now, from 2012, a lot of them have started splitting that vote.
Okay.
So this time in Iowa, for instance, Hillary Clinton, I think, has got 24 or thereabouts. And
Hillary Clinton has managed, in fact, 49.8% of the votes, and Bernie Sanders is close with around 49%. Yes.
And so she has got 24 delegates. He has got 21. And there is still a residual, I think 10 or 11 more delegates from Iowa that are in the hands of the party leadership for when the actual convention is held. So this kind of process will go on till about the middle of June. Then the party conventions will start.
Okay, so let's bring in other guests also. Mr. Prasad, he's explained the difference between a caucus and a primary, and how the voting processes take place, sometimes by secret ballot, sometimes lobbying is allowed there at the voting center. But what are national conventions, and is that stage 2 of the electoral process after caucuses and primaries?
Well, the primaries and caucuses will kind of sharpen the race and narrow down the list. And eventually the conventions which are scheduled in July would kind of pick up, the delegates will be voting, and also you have super delegates. Super delegates are party members of Congress and others who do not have to commit themselves either way. Of course, many have already committed on Clinton or so on and so forth, but by and large they can remain to themselves. And there's the conventions where they actually vote, and then they vote for the candidate who they think is the best to from their party to represent and take on the US presidential elections. And then the party gets behind the candidate so chosen. So it's all, so national conventions will give you, by then, but the race would have been narrowed. You will more or less kind of get a sense of who exactly is likely to win the nomination.
Fair enough. Right. So you've talked about the national conventions. What comes after the national conventions? What exactly happens on the 8th of November? What constitutes an electoral college?
Well, actually, even before, most of the time, even before the national convention actually happens, the race in both parties is more or less decided, because you emerge with a sizable number of delegates, and then somebody concedes. You know, like in 2008, Hillary conceded before the national convention, and then usually the front runner is endorsed by the runner-up, and then the convention, there have been very rare occasions when there has been a floor fight in the convention, where the contest runs up to the convention, and the floor there is
this time we really don't know what will happen, because the fight is really close as far as the Iowa caucus is concerned.
Especially on the Republican side, we don't know what will happen, because there is a possibility, and Trump has hinted at the possibility, that in case he doesn't get the nomination and he is close enough, he will not allow
Ted Cruz,
whoever is.
Ted Cruz is leading by 4%. I mean, that's the kind of margin, victory margin between Ted Cruz and
if I may
Donald
stick
Trump.
out and make a prediction of my own at this early stage,
of course. Why not?
I have a hunch that eventually Marco Rubio will be the Republican candidate. You know?
Okay, and he is currently at number 3 after the Iowa caucus. He's polled 23% of the votes.
He is number 3, but he is supported by the Republican establishment. The Republican establishment, Prabhat would say the apparatchiks, having been an old Moscow hand, but the party establishment doesn't like either Trump or Ted Cruz.
Okay.
And I have the feeling that the establishment will eventually gather behind Marco Rubio, and he will be the candidate.
Oh, that's interesting. Mr. Shukla, now the question really is, what is an electoral college, and what happens on the day the general election takes place, that is the 8th of November, and how is the final person decided before he takes over, I think, at noon on the 20th of January next year?
Yes, that's right. Okay, you've got the date absolutely right, and it's important because the rule is not the first Tuesday of the month, but the Tuesday after the first Monday of the month. That's, I don't know how they worked this out, but this is how they worked it out. So since first is a Tuesday, it's not going to be on Tuesday on the first that there will be the polling, but the Tuesday after the first Monday, which is 7th. So 8th is the polling day. The votes that will be cast will actually elect or select, whatever you want to say, an electoral college, which consists of exactly 538 persons, 435 House of Representatives. The number is chosen by the strength of the Congress, plus 3 for the District of Columbia. So that's how you get 100 senators, 435 representatives, and 3 representing the District of Columbia. These form the electoral college. By the time the voting is done, here actually when you carry a state, you get the entire electoral college of that state. So, I think there is one exception, I forget which one it is. Only one state allows a split, otherwise the winner takes the whole state. And that is where the Democrats have their strength, because the two really big states, California and New York, are very strongly Democratic. I think not since Reagan has anyone carried California, for instance.
Okay.
And he did, A, he was very popular, and B, he was a former governor of California.
Okay.
So, then they'd go through the formality of voting, which is normally done in December, and then the swearing in, as you said, is on the 20th of January.
Okay.
I just want to make one point
Yes.
about the nature of the voting that we have seen, which is what makes the situation this year particularly piquant. If you look at the Republican side, there's a very clear split, as KP was mentioning, between the establishment, the apparatchiks, and the non-establishment. Now, the interesting thing is that in Iowa, which is not a particularly revolutionary state, to continue the apparatchik analogy, 61% of the vote has gone to candidates who are non-establishment, which is to say, starting with Ted Cruz, Donald Trump, and Ben Carson. If you tally these three, you get 61% for the non-establishment vote,
Okay.
and 39 therefore for the establishment.
Okay.
It seems to me that this is going to be a tough one to crack for the establishment. How they are going to do it, I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if we actually see a hung convention this time.
Okay.
On the Republican side.
Okay.
On the Democratic side, again, I see Bernie Sanders is as non-establishment as you can get.
Okay.
And he's turned in a very good performance in a state where he was trailing by some 40 points.
Absolutely.
Just
He was in
6
single
months
digits
ago.
according to the polls.
No one ever even thought that he was a serious challenger.
Okay,
And
okay.
look how far he's come.
Fair enough. Mr. Prasad, did you expect the kind of upset that Donald Trump has finally got in Iowa? And what does this mean for his candidature and for others in Republican Party?
Well, let's remember that this is the first of the race, and it kind of gives you an indication as to which way the traditional vote is.
Indeed.
But if you really look at the entire spectrum of primaries and caucuses, there's an estimate that not more than 20% of people actually get to vote here or participate in these kind of elections. So there's a big chunk which is out of this process. It could be more in terms of percentage, but it's a rough ballpark percentage figure.
But do
I'm
you
giving.
think that more of those with evangelical and conservative views
Well,
actually voted, which is
in
why
case
Ted
of in
Cruz
case
got
of
what he did?
one of the Republican candidates, I think Ted Cruz, he had that kind of a backing, and that was very clear because he had built up his campaign almost a year ago. He had kind of done the homework, whereas Donald Trump came in much later to kind of.
Is a celebrity status there going against him?
It's not a celebrity status because he's played the game differently, whereas Ted Cruz began his campaign, rather his whole preparations began somewhere in December 2014 actually, when there was a small group of meeting and his people started collecting the data.
Whereas Trump entered the race only around
Sep-
June or July last year.
July. So, and he comes with big money. You see, he's played it big all the time. So he comes in with a different. Whereas I'm recollecting like 2008. If you jog your memory, I think Mr. Nair would correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes.
When Mike Huckabee, because of his same evangelical
yes.
kind of thing, he surged. But by the time it entered the third or fourth, he had dropped out. In fact, there was a joke at that point of time that he had carried a contingent of people to cover, and he just dropped them in the state because he ran out of money and they had to come back on their own.
Right.
So, these were the stories at that point of time. So, it's, as I said, it's early time, but it gives you an indication. One, of course, the anger of the middle class is going to be the factor which is most people are banking upon.
Okay.
And these extreme positions people start taking right from the beginning. You will see that it will get sharpened. The debate will sharpen on many issues.
Absolutely. And does that apply more to the Democrats on whether to support the kind of legacy which Barack Obama will be leaving behind, or to go in for more aggressive and more radical health care and economic reforms? Does that debate within the Democratic Party exacerbate from here on, given the kind of close contest that we are seeing in Iowa between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders?
It is my assessment that the Obama legacy, both the candidates would like to bury.
Okay.
Both Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton, because one of the big problems the Democrats are facing in this election is that in the last 8 years the middle class has shrunk. Actual income levels have gone down, and Obama's health plan hasn't worked as well as it should have. I was in Washington until last week, and I talked to some big companies which were very generous on healthcare benefits, and they say they cannot afford the healthcare for employees anymore.
Okay.
So there is strong anger against Obama, as a result of which both candidates would like to bury Obama's legacy, I think. But having said that, Bernie Sanders is doing so well not so much because of him. Many of the votes for Bernie Sanders are actually votes against Hillary Clinton.
Okay.
There are people who don't want the Clintons
And why is
back
that?
in the White House.
Why is that?
Because Bill Clinton is a master at having manipulated the American system. I mean, if it were not for him, in a sense, Obama would not have become president. He ran the Democratic machine so efficiently in Charlotte, for example, at the National Convention, where Obama really made his mark. It was Bill Clinton who was the most popular speaker. But having done that, Hillary, he also managed to put his wife in the Senate, and together they managed to push themselves to the point where there could be a second Clinton in the White House. But Clinton is the ultimate establishment candidate, and the middle class and the working class in America feel that these kind of people have let them down, that the American dream has now become a very narrow dream. I mean, it's the famous 1%. So Hillary Clinton represents that, and every vote for Bernie Sanders is actually more of a vote against Hillary Clinton than a vote for Bernie Sanders.
Do you agree with that point of view, Mr. Shukla? And also there is this email controversy which has been doing the rounds, and there are so many emails that have already been released. So many of them have been classified as classified retrospectively. Do you think that will weigh on her campaign as well, and on her prospects?
Well, I wish you hadn't asked me the first question, because I actually
You need to stick your
I
neck out
actually
tonight.
don't agree. I don't agree, because in a number of studies that have been done on the Iowa caucus, I'm not generalizing, but in the Iowa caucus, a lot of people who have backed Senator Sanders have said that they have nothing against Hillary Clinton. And among Democrats particularly, there is this sense that it's a team game. So if my candidate doesn't make it, I'm happy to support the other candidate. The other point I want to make is about the power of money. Money has been unleashed since 2010 in two famous Supreme Court rulings, which basically ended up allowing people, corporates, individuals, families to contribute unlimited amounts through a vehicle known as the Super PAC. Now, all of us thought that this meant that the guy with the biggest war chest was going to be the winner. I have here a list of who has actually got the most money as of now.
Okay.
Number one is Jeb Bush, 133 million.
Okay.
And he's ended up a very pathetic 8th or something with 3% of the vote.
Indeed.
Hillary Clinton is second with 130 odd. Ted Cruz is third. Bernie Sanders is fourth. Ben Carson is fifth. Marco Rubio is sixth. Chris Christie is seventh. Donald Trump is eighth.
So those who finally made it in Iowa are there in the top 5 or 6. They are there. I mean, Jeb
They
Bush
are
may
there,
not be there
but you can
in the
see
race.
that the number one, Jeb Bush, with the biggest war chest, has performed very badly. So there is a limit, I think, to how much the kind of influence and success that money alone can buy. Now, your question about the emails is a very serious one. I think the Democratic establishment is trying to play it down, and someone, I think it was Marco Rubio who said this in one of the debates, that the Democrats have the best super PAC in America, which is the American media. So the American media are also playing it down, but there are two separate criminal investigations going on in the FBI
Okay.
against Hillary Clinton. And you know, the timing couldn't be worse from Hillary Clinton's point of view, because as the nomination process advances and they're heading towards the conventions, is exactly the time that the results of these investigations are going to come out. One is about the emails and hence the national security, and you are absolutely right.
A lot of things are weighing on
They
her.
have been, they were classified actually. In one case at least, we know that it was a classified document. She sent a message to her aides saying, send it to me, remove the classification markings and email it to me on my private server.
Okay.
So this is going to haunt her. I think Benghazi we have not heard the last of.
Okay.
And I think, as KP mentioned, she is as establishment as you can get. And there is a great deal of resentment towards the establishment. Everybody says Washington is broke, and in terms of disapproval ratings, Congress comes at I think about 9% approval today. I wonder who those 9% are who still think they are doing a good job.
Okay.
Frankly, 91% have it absolutely right. They have done nothing in Congress,
Okay, now
except they
after-
have managed to pass the budget.
Okay. Mr. Prasad, after Iowa, the battle will shift to New Hampshire and South Carolina.
Yeah, there's
So,
Nevada also.
what do you expect there? Who do you expect to pick up? Who do you expect to lag behind?
Well, again, it's a traditional vote, because if you look at Iowa, also has a rural segment, but New Hampshire, the electorate would change. You see the kind of, then you have this urban versus rural, which is going to kick in as you go
Because
along.
according to the polls that we've seen before the Iowa caucus, there was a huge lead that Donald Trump enjoyed.
See,
there
those
in both
those
these
polls will
states.
keep changing every week. There's several pollsters who do that, and the points keep swinging up and down. And if you remember, just before Iowa, I think the gap between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders was something like 3 percentage points, something as close
There
as that.
there is an error
But
margin
if you look at
as
if
well.
you, no, this is, if you look at the actual figures that have come out now, it's not, it's even closer.
It's
So
closer.
okay, so Hampshire would vote differently.
Okay, okay. Since we are running short of time, just your quick word on what do you think are the main issues with regard to this US presidential election, which could play a major role as far as the final voting is concerned by the Electoral College?
Well, healthcare is going to be a major
There are other issues
issue.
as well, for instance, immigration,
Immigration,
then, gun control.
ISIS, the
climate change.
Islamic resurgence in the Middle East, those are there. But you know, if I may, I would like to add two minor points to what Prabhat said. One is about the money. One has to take into account the fact that Bernie Sanders donations are mainly $5, $10.
Crowdsourcing, absolutely.
And unlike Jeb Bush and Hillary, the big corporate donors,
donations,
Bernie Sanders has outdone Obama in getting these small donations from ordinary people, which I think is very significant. And the other small point I want to make is that when I was in Washington, I talked to several people in the Democratic establishment, and they fear a scenario where closer to the national convention, Hillary may be indicted on this email thing, you
Absolutely.
know,
Okay.
and they fear that after becoming the winner, virtual winner, she may actually be disqualified.
Okay.
And
Your quick last word on who do you think will finally make it to the White House? You have to stick your neck out, Mr. Shukla. I'll begin with you.
Now, I pass on that one, but I'm never very good at predicting the future. Past, I predict brilliantly. But you know, I just want to add to some of the issues that are going to be important. The
Running
economy,
out of time, yeah, okay.
the overall
Economy.
economy, and I'd say if there is one more or more terror attacks, national security will jump to the top.
Okay, national security
And
will
that
jump to the
will
top.
help
What does this
the
mean for
Republicans.
India in general and for Indian Americans?
Well, Indian Americans have their own issues, and the biggest thing is their association with the country and where they're actually working, and they need to be, as I mentioned, they don't want to be called as Indian Americans, the hyphenated acts, but they actually think like Americans. but the acceptance is different. And the other issue is
You're referring to Bobby Jindal's statement.
Bobby Jindal's statement was very famous, which actually personifies, and that does rounds many other places where it is not talked about so frequently.
Okay.
The assimilation is there, but the acceptance levels
Right.
change. That's what happens. And secondly, of course, for India, I think it's a little too early, because the Indian establishment obviously have to keep the lines open in both camps, the Republican camp and the Democratic
Absolutely.
camp.
So thank you so much, Mr. Shukla, Mr. Nair and Mr. Prasad for having joined us on Late Edition tonight. So one thing is clear after Monday night's Iowa caucus, and that is that there is a long volatile election season ahead before two deeply fractured parties can unite behind a nominee. From Iowa, the race to the White House now moves to New Hampshire, where the primaries are scheduled for the 9th of February, and then to South Carolina. With that, we conclude this edition of Late Edition. Thanks for watching.